Hello, and thank you for joining our Teaching for 21st Century webinars brought to you by the Glazov Gang and David Horowitz Freedom Center. I'm your host, Annie Cyrus. Please use the Q&A box on your screen if you have any questions. I am extremely honored, privileged, and excited to introduce our guest tonight. He is Dr. Charles Jacob. He is the president of Americans for Peace and Tolerance. Dr. Jacobs, what an honor to have you tonight.
Well, thank you very much, Annie. I'm always glad to see you, and I'm especially honored to be on anything that David Horowitz does. It's magnificent.
Absolutely agreed. Before we get us started on your presentation, would you please kindly tell our audience a little bit about yourself?
Well, okay, for the purposes of this discussion, my story is rather simple. I've been at this for about 31 years, trying in a variety of ways to do what Jewish leaders and others have failed to do. That is to protect and defend the Jewish community, also to fight for human rights of people oppressed in the Muslim realm, and finally to fight for America as well. It's clear to me 31 years later that Israel is just the first target of a left Muslim alliance, you know, the Red-Green Alliance, now fully emerged from the shadows, whose ultimate goal is the destruction of liberal society. And so what that means is that defending Israel and the Jews, as many non-Jews now understand, is key to saving what's left of Western civilization. And Jewish leaders who fail to defend their community and their people are betraying everyone, not just the Jews. So I can quickly just give you a brief background of what I've done, and that will, I think, enable us to go forward. So in 1989, I co-founded the Boston branch of CAMRA, Committee for Accuracy in Middle East Reporting in America, to expose and combat what was an emerging media bias against Israel. In 1992, I launched the American Anti-Slavery Group to educate Americans about the enslavement of Blacks by Arabs and Muslims in North Africa, still going on. In 2002, I co-founded the David Project with my partner, Avi Goldwasser, to train Jewish students in how to defend Israel on campus. And in 2008, Avi and I and Ilya Feoktistov founded the Americans for Peace and Tolerance, where we continued all of these fights, but added Islamic Jew hatred to the mix. So it's clear to me that if Jewish leaders were doing what God put them on the earth to do, I would have had a very different, more relaxed life. But among other blessings, I got to know the best of the best people of our people in these fights, including David Horowitz, and I'm very grateful for that. So I've got about 20 minutes to tell you what I think is the most important story that's missing from the news. So let me do highlights and themes. I imagine that our listeners here already know that the American Jewish community is under ideological and physical assault, that every Jewish building in America, every Jewish institution in this country now needs security. Jews have been murdered, assaulted in the street. Jewish buildings have been stormed with gunfire. Crimes against Jews, according to the FBI, are more than 60% of the crimes against all religious targets. Against Muslims, it's about 15%. You could see videos of Jews being assaulted in the streets of New York almost every week, sometimes twice or three times a week. So politically, the Jews are rapidly losing power and influence. They've lost half of the Democratic Party, the energetic and surging half, and that's because we've lost in many key precincts of American life the ideological war against Israel that started in the media and on the campuses a few decades ago. Jewish students and the only few Zionist professors left on campus, and now also non-Jewish conservative students, are currently under social media mob attack. Syracuse is the most recent example. In Boston, here right now, we're about to file suit against a prominent Massachusetts university whose administrative staff incited students to physically attack a conservative Jewish student. Stay tuned, that's going to be a big story. Anti-Israel curricula, now standard fare in college classrooms, has been rapidly spreading in the public and private high schools under the guises of peace studies, conflict resolution, or merely history. And I haven't even mentioned yet the Jew hatred taught in America's mosques or the bias against Israel in the liberal churches. So Jews are in the vortex right now of a perfect storm. We have 4 external enemies: the right, the left progressives, the Islamists, and the Farrakhan-led Black Jew haters. And we suspect they're all coordinating their assaults, we know. And this, meanwhile, while the police are being put in handcuffs. I would say the situation is appalling and even dire. Look, we can't determine what our enemies will do to us, will try to do to us, but surely what we should deal with and what we can deal with is the failure of our own leaders. So as these assaults mount, the Jewish defense and communal organizations seem to me to be like deer in the headlights, paralyzed or worse. None of them has a strategy that makes sense. No one has a plan that makes sense. And I'm here talking about the big Jewish organizations, the Jewish federations, the Jewish community relations councils, the American Jewish Committee, but most importantly, the biggest Jewish defense agency, the Anti-Defamation League. The leaders of these institutions have not understood, or they willfully ignore and refuse to understand, the nature and extent of the ideological assault against our people. So here is, in our view, how the once powerful Jewish community is being brought low. First, we all need to understand that there emerged a new form of anti-Semitism. Call it what you like: anti-Zionism, Palestinianism, anti-Israelism. It should not have been surprised that a new form of Jew hatred emerged, because that's the way it's always been. The Jew hatred virus morphs predictably, like this. In each epoch of history, anti-Semites accused Jews of committing that particular sin that is most hateful in that time. So when religion guided society, the Jews were charged with deicide. When nationhood was seen as the best way peoples expressed their virtue, Jews were cursed as stateless people. When race theories were seen as true markers of value, Jews were portrayed by Nazis as racial vermin. And today, when nationalism is a sin and globalism is the highest virtue, the Jewish state, Jewish nationalism, is the main target. Israel became the Jew of nations. This should have surprised nobody. But many Jews, reading the New York Times, misread the New York Times hectoring of Israel, thought about it as legitimate criticisms of Israel's policy. And this was the enormous error, because it was an assault. Here's how to tell, I think, the best way if something is anti-Semitic. Alan Dershowitz tells this story as a parable, and I think it's a really important teaching point. So it turns out that in the 1920s, Harvard's President Lowell, who wanted to restrict the number of Jews admitted to Harvard, told his board that Jews cheat, Jewish students cheat. Well, a prominent jurist by the name of Learned Hand answered him, and he said, well, Protestant students cheat too. And Lowell said to him, you're changing the subject. We're talking about the Jews. That's the key. Why are we talking about the Jews? What explains the obsession with Jewish behavior compared to the relative indifference toward the conduct of other peoples? It works like this. Why, Mr. New York Times, are you talking about Israel? So Israel has a wall you don't like, and you write about that a lot. Its enemies call it an apartheid wall, and you publish that phrase in your paper too, a lot. But you know, There are 24 other walls across the globe, barriers that separate people who are in conflict. And you, Mr. New York Times, hardly ever write about that. It seems Jewish walls matter to the New York Times. Here's another trick. The media focuses on the Palestinians who have been killed by Israelis. So much so that it has now become a cause that pulls the heartstrings of decent people. But actually, between 1987 and 2014, about 8,500 Palestinians were killed in confrontations and violent confrontations with Israelis. But millions of Arabs and Muslims have been killed in conflicts that don't even involve Jews. Millions, many millions. And they have been killed by Arabs and Muslims. So if you think, by the way, that the phrase Black Lives Matter is a new thing, meaning to point to only certain Black lives that matter, because only by certain their deaths caused by only certain people. This was all preceded. This is not new. It was preceded by Palestinian lives matter. Certain lives matter. Certain Arab lives matter, only if killed in conflict with certain people. Jews were that certain people a long time before white cops became that certain people. So to do this trick, you have to ignore, to do this trick, that is to focus on Jewish behavior, which is the fundamental definition of, to focus critically on Jewish behavior, which is the fundamental definition of anti-Semitism. You have to do something else. You have to ignore the many Arabs and Palestinians and Muslims who were killed by people who are not Jews, just as you have to ignore the many Blacks who have very sadly been killed by Blacks in America. So if you can't recognize the emergence of this new anti-Semitism, this focus on Israeli behavior as a new form of anti-Semitism, you cannot defend the Jews. So I'm going to tell you a key point, what I think is a key point in American Jewish history that I don't think anyone else has identified. 1989, Andrea Levin and I were preparing to launch Camera to fight media bias against Israel. Suddenly, as we were about to form the organization, we were approached by two very important people close to ADL, the Anti-Defamation League, who asked us not to do it. Let ADL do it, they said. Let ADL be the ADL for Israel. That was the phrase, and I recall it vividly. Why, we said? Because, they argued, if it was the ADL that told the public, that told the world, that the New York Times and the Boston Globe and the Washington Post and the LA Times were cheating on the Jewish state with their false reports and their hyper concentration, and they're ignoring the really awful things in the neighborhood, in Israel's neighborhood, that would really matter, because the ADL speaks in the name of America's Jews. They were right, and we agreed with them. But after some consideration, the head of the ADL at the time, Abraham Foxman, declined. I don't know exactly why. I suppose he needed his letters to be published in the New York Times for fundraising purposes. I suppose he didn't want to upset any of his left-wing donors who agree with him about hectoring Israel to make it a better place, of course. But I do posit to you that the exact moment that the ADL decided not to speak in the name of the Jewish community against Jewry's biggest defamers at the time, the mainstream media, which was trumpeting lies and slander, the minute that the ADL refused to say to the American public that the media was lying about the Jews, that marked the beginning of the decline of American Jewish fortunes. And it was at that moment a vacuum was created. And then wonderful Jewish activists, some of the best people we have, seeing that the community was abandoned by its leadership, tried to fill the void by creating the organizations. They tried to stick their finger in the dike that could not, as we see today, hold back the flood of Jew hatred. After Camera came the David Project, Stand With Us, Hasbara Fellows, and many, many more. The Zionist Organization of America, ZOA, was always there. even before that. Mort Klein is the one national leader, by the way, who has no problem saying the truth about this, that Jewish leaders have failed the community, and I salute him. AIPAC, of course, was always there, but its mission was to lobby Congress for Israel and not to fight anti-Semitism. Defending the community was the mission of the well-funded, powerful ADL, which has now been, by the way, taken over by a former Obama consultant. I kid you not. Next phase. So uncontested in the media in any serious way, anti-Israelism moved to the campuses. In 2003, Avi Goldwasser, my partner, whose films many of you have seen and should see, went with me to secretly meet Jewish students who told us, who cried out their hearts about how they were being harassed and intimidated in New York City at Columbia by their professors in class and out of class whenever they challenged the anti-Israel lessons or readings. So we went to the ADL and we told them. Nothing happened. We went to David Harris, head of the American Jewish Committee. And he, by the way, is probably the most eloquent of the establishment Jewish leaders. But he told us point blank, we don't do campuses. We do diplomacy. Well, in a generation or two, he would be having to deal with diplomats poisoned on the very campuses he didn't do. Jewish students were shocked when they came to campus. They were totally unprepared and undefended to deal with anti-Israel arguments and anti-Israel forces. By the way, next to Jewish leaders, college administrators may be the most cowardly officials in America. Without pressure from our leaders, college deans and presidents and administrators could easily bow to the forces arrayed against us. And there were many. It was the professoriate, the leftist student groups, the media, the Black and Latino radicals, the communists, and later the Muslim students, who, organized and well-funded, could create pain for the administrators, which the Jewish leaders didn't want to do and didn't do. Avi Goldwasser made a film called Columbia Unbecoming. It's a classic. Interviewed there are the students who described painfully how they were being bullied. We made the film. We thought the film could wake up the Jewish community. That was in 2003. You can find it online. It woke up a few, but it didn't create the change that we wanted in the sentiment of the Jewish leadership, of national Jewish leadership, who had the power and the money to act, to help the kids, to stop the assault. And now, from 2003 to now, it's 100 times worse. And I can tell you that if not for the pandemic, I'm sure we'd be seeing assaults on Jews on campuses from coast to coast. Next, Hamas came to Boston to establish a base. That's right. They set up shop. Boston's Jewish leaders cowered. An Islamist group pretending to be moderate Muslims created the largest mosque on the eastern seaboard in Roxbury, Massachusetts, on the outskirts of Boston. And on their board was, among others, Yusuf Qaradawi. Now, Qaradawi is the spiritual leader of the Muslim Brotherhood. You can, with 3 clicks on your computer, you can see him exclaim to masses of Muslims in Cairo or online that every Jew in the world must be killed. He was coming to Boston to build a big mosque. The main organizational head of the Islamic Society of Boston was Abdul Rahman Alamudi, who in 2004 was sentenced to 24 years in jail for financing Hamas. So these were the fellows who were going to build the largest mosque in Boston, and their mission was to radicalize the historically moderate Muslim population in our city. We did our research. We had it dead cold. We had every fact. We called a meeting of Boston's Jewish leaders. the Federation, the JCRC, the American Jewish Committee, the ADL, and we showed them who these people were who were coming to Boston to do this. They clearly represented a direct threat to the Jews of Boston and to the general public. So they told us that we didn't understand, that we needed to be inclusive. We needed to support diversity. We needed to encourage interfaith dialogue. The head of Boston's Federation, Barry Schrag, came to my house to watch on my computer the speeches of Karadawi, calling for the death of all the world's Jews, and who was now likely to guide Boston's Muslims. I showed him how Al-Amudi was an operative. I showed him how the same fellow named Walid Fatahi, who was reaching out to the Jews for their support for the mosque project, had written Jew-hating screeds in the Arabic press. And in response, the head of Boston Jewry said to me, "Charles, you want me to fight a Jewish jihad?" "No, Barry," I said, "just go to the mayor, who we have supported, and tell him not to let those folks have a major institution in the hub. Tell him not to subsidize the purchase of land for the mosque," which they did. We got nothing. Moral confusion, delusions, cowardice. And now we found the curriculum taught in that mosque. My executive director, chief of research here, Ilya Feoktistov, is a brilliant researcher. He found the curriculum. It's the Muslim version of Nazi hatred. And now 14 people connected with that mosque have been either killed or on the run from federal authorities or are in jail. The Boston Marathon bombers were congregants, Barry. We've been hectoring Boston's Jewish leaders and pleading with them for years to stop giving Islamists a kosher stamp, which is their key to the city, right? Because if the Jews say that this bunch of Muslims is okay, well, if the Jews have the most skin in the game, obviously it must be true. Welcome. Finally, we hectored our Jewish leaders. We made fun of them, we mocked them, we humiliated them, including a rabbi who allowed radical Muslims to come to his congregation and raise funds, mind you, funds that were certainly meant to harm Jews. So now finally, after all of this work, frustrating as it is, the JCRC and the ADL have withdrawn from their very public embrace of that of that mosque and its leaders. You should know the story. Ilya, my executive director, documented this entire episode of Jewish in Boston history in his recently published book, Terror in the Cradle of Liberty. The book names names, more than I have here, shames the shameful cowards among Boston's Jewish leadership. It's on Amazon. Terror in the Cradle of Liberty. Finally, the public schools. So the left and the Muslim organizations have learned to insert pedagogically correct anti-Israel curricula in the public schools. It's part of the anti-Western push by the left and by the Muslims. And they're doing quite well. So Israel, American school kids learn today, is not so great. The Arabs, of course, are wonderful, and Islam is the religion of peace. So we have here probably the most famous fight about this. We're in Newton, Massachusetts. We've been fighting to correct this. They didn't want to give us the teaching materials. We had to issue FOIAs to get teaching materials that are paid for by the public, but we did. We're fighting this, and guess what? The Jewish Federation and the JCRC and the ADL told the mayor of Newton, Massachusetts, that we were wrong, that there was no problem with the curriculum. So we cannot win outside a lawsuit, which just may happen. Stay tuned. So in sum, America's major institutions, the media, the campuses, the high schools, I didn't even mention the liberal churches, the mosques, and now a big part of the Democratic Party believes and promotes an anti-Israel narrative, which includes an attack on American Jews and others who support the Jewish state. This can only be seen as a catastrophic defeat. Apart from the apart from the ZOA, we are, I think, practically the only group that feels there's a moral imperative to tell this story, to tell the Jews and the general public about the failure of our community's leadership. We have placed ads in 16 Jewish newspapers and Commentary Magazine explaining this failure and describing what real leaders should be doing instead. So I think for questions about why they do it, why do they act this way, and to maybe discuss Vladimir Lenin's question, what is to be done, I think I'll leave that for the Q&A. Okay?
That sounds great. I'm pretty sure everybody will have that question. But before I start reading the question as they're coming in, you mentioned something at the beginning of your presentation that I've been seeing, hearing, reading about, and no one seemed to have any actual answer to it. So I'm going to ask you, I have a feeling you might have an answer for it. So by definition, by reports, by stats, by facts, as of today, Jewish community in every country is facing the highest discrimination daily. However, every country is working toward placing blasphemy laws and nothing to protect Jews. Why is that?
Fear and cowardice and anti-Semitism. Look, I think that people are afraid of Muslim masses who get angry and enraged. And when they read what the most radical of them say, they're terrified. And so blasphemy is when you say something, or when somebody said that you said something, you might not even have said it, that's critical of Islam or the Prophet Muhammad. You can be killed. You should be killed, according to them. And there are so many cases where they've tried to and sometimes succeeded, and many cases where they've succeeded in killing people for doing what in the West is supposed to happen. In the West, the Enlightenment teaches us there is no dogma, no set of beliefs that shouldn't be run through intellectual critique. Answer questions. Everybody does this, except that Islam won't allow this to happen. Islam in its current form won't. So they pass blasphemy laws because they've got a gun to their head and they're cowards. Why they don't protect Jews? Partially the same reason, because Jews are now cursed as, not just by Louis Farrakhan, but especially in the Muslim world, Jews are often cursed as devils. So why would you protect Jews? Europe is the biggest outrage and shame. Europe, which killed 6 million Jews, and didn't stand up against another sort of Western fascism, now is not protecting its Jews enough from rising Jew hatred that comes from Muslims, but not only Muslims, from the right, the left, etc. So that's the reason: fear and cowardice and anti-Semitism.
Yeah, so my guess was correct. It just makes sense. As an ex-Muslim, no matter how I put it in the formula, it's, well, Islam uses fear, and most of people are afraid of Islamic movement. And then technically within Quran, Hadith, Sunnah, all of them, Jews are the cursed people, and they are the #1 enemy of Islam, and they shall all be killed before day of peace arrives. So the formula kind of makes sense for Islamic movement to rise up, gain power, and for Jewish people to be suppressed and oppressed. So you have a lot of questions coming in, and I do not want to take away from our audience. So if you don't mind, I'm going to start reading the very first question. The question says, why do you think the mainstream human rights community does not really care about modern day Black slavery in Muslim North Africa?
Okay, so I'm actually writing a book about my experiences in Sudan. I went to Sudan 3 times illegally. I flew into circuitous route into southern Sudan to help a Christian group, Christian Solidarity International, tell the world about what was happening to the Black African, mostly Christians in South Sudan, where there was, the Christians call this a hidden Holocaust. 2 to 3 million people were killed in a self-declared jihad. And as part of the jihad, Arab militia stormed African villages, killed the men, and took the women and children as slaves to be bought, sold, traded, used as concubines mostly. And I tried, when I found out about this, I broke the story in the New York Times. I wrote an op-ed in the New York Times about it with a Mauritanian Muslim partner of mine. And I thought all we needed to do was to reawaken the anti-apartheid movement, right? To get all the same people who were marching against anti-Black life and policies and horrors in South Africa to care about something in North Africa that was a lot worse. And I was wrong, because the anti-apartheid movement ran away, hid, ducked. I mean, there were important exceptions. I had some liberals. And the reason is, Amnesty International, by the way, I mean, if they could have filled the streets of New York to free the slaves, and that would have freed the slaves, I think. But they didn't care about that, because most of these human rights organizations consist of white people, idealistic white people who have swallowed the leftist line that the whites are the bad guys. You see it now more than ever. I mean, I just was discovering this 25 years ago. Now it's deeply embedded in all these white kids who think that they live on undeserved wealth, who think that the West only has survived because it did bad things to other people. So their reason for joining the human rights community was to say, I'm not a bad white guy. I'm a good white guy. And to march under the banner of, I'm a good white guy. Well, a story that says that Arabs and Muslims, or non-whites, but especially Arabs and Muslims, are doing horrible, horrible things to Blacks, worse than any one of your ancestors could imagine. Or, that distracts from their cause. That gets in the way of what they wanted to do, which was to use this as a way to get out of the guilt complex by saying the whites are bad and I'm going to tell you the whites are bad. So it's a fraud. The human rights community, the established human rights community, is a fraud. It doesn't care about human rights. It cares about pointing a finger at the West. I mean, it's much the same as the Black Lives Matter right now. I mean, why don't the human rights community care about all of the Black lives, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds times more of the Black lives snuffed out, sadly, tragically, in gunfights and not by white cops. Same reason.
Yes, as you were explaining, it was in my head. It's like the way you're describing it is the same way how recently Planned Parenthood started supporting and funding Black Lives Matter movements. Very ironic. It's the same way mainstream human rights organizations work. And I say that with passion. As a single tiny fish in the tank of human rights activism, I can see how most of our fights get turned down when we're trying to save an Arab Christian from Middle East and their lives don't matter. Let's connect this to the next question. It's a bit of a longer question. I try to read it as fast as possible. So the question says that you said that Jews are losing power. That seems surprising because I hear more and more people blaming Jews for the following. 1, pushing for open borders. 2, third world and Islamic immigration into America, pushing for that. Number 3, for everything that is going wrong in America due to Jews who hold power in America. What are your thoughts on those criticism and blames?
Jews are losing power to protect and defend and promote Jewish interests. Those Jews who are, let's take the case of the, everybody knows that it's liberal Reformed Jewish rabbis who are in the lead, in the forefront of trying to open our borders to people from the Muslim world, refugees from the Muslim world, who, I mean, and they say, well, we were refugees too, so we have to reach out to them because they're refugees, all refugees are the same. The fact of the matter is, as the ADL itself knows but dare not repeat too often, attitudes about Jews and death wishes for Jews and defamation of Jews and calumny against Jews is a staple of those societies which these people come from. In Syria, for example, I wrote about this. You study the Syrian government curriculum, which is the only curriculum there. That's the only curriculum there. The Syrian government curriculum teaches people the classic Nazi stuff about Jews. So you're going to go into Syria and you're going to welcome bucket loads of these people here, and you're not going to ask them what they think about Jews before you settle them into Newton, Massachusetts. Or you're not going to ask them also what they think about women, what they think about gays, what they think about gay marriage, what they think about democracy and free speech. You're not going to ask them any of that stuff because you are after public virtue. And you are signaling I am a good person because I am welcoming all these people. So it is Jews that are in the forefront of that. As you know, you can read Nazi literature and they know that really good because they put that on the front page. So I would say that Jews have lost power or are losing power to defend legitimate Jewish interests. That's what I would say.
Understandable. Next question is asking if you could make comments on the anti-Semitism of the Black Lives Matter movement.
Yeah, okay. So this is a tragedy because, look, anybody who saw the scene of that cop on the neck of that guy, right? And if you didn't get infuriated or angry or sad or something, you don't have a soul, right? I don't want to live in a country in which Black lives don't matter. Okay, so Black Lives Matter. Now, what's happened, and the phrase is a winner because it's true. If you think about what it's supposed to mean, Black Lives Matter. Why wouldn't they matter? Okay, that organization, Black Lives Matter, has been taken over by, founded by people who are communists, people who are anti-Semitic. And I don't have my notes in front of me on that, but you could Google it almost anywhere and you can see who are the leaders of Black Lives Matter. Where does it get funded? It gets funded by this groups that get funded by George Soros. And it's being hijacked all the way by the American Muslims. They want to make Black Lives Matter their thing because they say, they lie. Well, you know, just like that cop killed that black guy, that's what Israeli cops do to us in Palestine. And not only that, but an American Jewish community is sending American police to Israel to learn how to beat up and kill black people. This is horrific. This is a defamation beyond defamation. And this is bought and paid for by the Red Green Alliance, which is taking over the phrase and the movement Black Lives Matter. Now, I think most people who go on peaceful, legitimately peaceful protests aren't like that, don't think those things. But, you know, communists have long learned how to hijack movements, and they're doing it. And the Islamists are doing a terrific job. You know, one phrase I want to make sure I say here tonight, Annie. Yeah, I think it's the best description of what's happened to the Jews, and it's by my friend Daniel Pipes. He said, "Whoever would have imagined 50 years ago, 100 years ago, that the Jews would have made the best soldiers and the Arabs the best publicists, right? They beat us at a game that we're supposed to be good at. Horrific, shameful. It's so shameful." Okay.
One thing I would like to add to your answer, if you don't mind. Also, don't forget, Black Lives Matter movement has been hijacked by the regime of my motherland, Islamic Republic of Iran, put
Yeah.
together an international exhibition filled with pictures and cartoons of George Floyd. And the very opening, as soon as you walk through the door on the left wall, there was a picture of the officer with his knee on George Floyd's neck, and his face was covered by David, Star of David.
Yeah. Right.
I was confused of where did they even get that image. The officer wasn't Jew. The officer wasn't Israeli. The officer wasn't even trained by Israel. But when they make up facts, and then our mainstream media grabs their made up facts and turn it into facts of America, that's what you face. Anti-Semitism rising every day,
Right.
hate of Jews growing in America based on absolutely no fact but lies.
So this takes us back to the theme here. So what are American Jewish leaders doing, right? In this assault, what are they doing? They're telling us that the biggest problem comes from the right. They have seminars. ADL has seminars, and they have people. The biggest problem comes from Nazis and neo-Nazis. Well, there are Nazis and neo-Nazis, and there'll always be Nazis and neo-Nazis, but there are no Nazi professors on campuses. There's no Nazi that is acceptable in public company, in legitimate American circles. They'll always be there. But the Jewish leaders are terrified and don't want to fight against the bigger sources of anti-Semitism, which are coming from the Farrakhaners and Islamists and the left, because they're clinging to the left. As the left kicks the Jews in the teeth, these Jewish leaders, the guy who runs ADL, he embraces the left as though it were not a major fount of Jew hatred. They don't know what to do. They have no clue about what to do, and yet they're the leaders and the spokespeople for the Jewish community, which is terrible, has to change.
Very true. And actually, 3 questions. I will read this one because they all have the same question within. That says, today, 80% of the US Jews are voting Democrats. Basically, the question is, how can we change that? How can we turn all these Democrat Jews to become Republican, vote Republican, and stop self-hating?
I don't, we've tried for 30 years, Avi Goldwasser and I, and Ilya, and all the people I mentioned to, we've tried for 30 years at least to use facts and logic and data to convince Jews that the left, among other things, that the left is not your friend, that your father's, this ain't your daddy's, your granddaddy's liberalism anymore, that the progressives have defeated the liberals. You could see that every day. The liberals are only now being awoken to, some of them, to fight back. So these are delusions of a people under siege. This was a subtitle of a book by Ken Levin, Andrea Levin's husband. Great book, The Oslo Syndrome. So the Jews are a people under siege, and they're afraid, and they think that, and they remember that the right was an enemy. The right was the biggest enemy, and the church was, and the fascists were, and the Democrats did seem to help them. But they're stuck in a time that's moved on. They're stuck in like amber, like ants in amber. And I don't know, I'm terribly afraid to say this, but I don't know what will change them except Jewish blood in the streets. Arguments, logic, data don't seem to work. But we still have to try.
Of course, we can't give up hope, but next question is actually very interesting. I had no idea this is happening, but the question says, why doesn't the FBI hate statistics not show Muslims under the category of assailants who assault Jews, where the reports does, though, include Muslims as victims?
Yeah. Well, I don't know if there's a category like that. Assaulters of Jews. I'm sure they wouldn't want to put Muslims there because, look, when we found out who was building this mosque in Boston, we went to the FBI. We had, Ilya found enormous quantities of data showing checks going to the mosque from terror organizations and from the mosque to organizations associated with terror. We showed them who Al-Amudi was. We showed him who all these people were, the FBI, right? Nothing happened. It never came up. And in fact, Louis Gohmert asked the head of the FBI in a pretty famous tape in Congress, well, didn't you know about Al-Amudi when you were talking about the Boston Mosque? And he said, it was Mueller. He said, no. Well, he did know because we told them. We told the FBI. We have it in our PowerPoint to the FBI. So I think anti-American forces or politically correct forces or woke forces or Democratic Party forces have really penetrated to the heart of every American institution, including the FBI, as we know from other cases. So that's the FBI. They've thrown people out of the FBI who speak about the Islamic threat.
Yes, you cannot be an Islamophobe and part of law enforcement nowadays. And that was me being sarcastic. I don't believe in Islamophobia. Okay, I'll read this question. I kind of know the answer, but I know millions and millions of people want to know how to address this. So it says, how to respond to people who say Israel is oppressing the Palestinians.
Israel is oppressing the Palestinians. Well, Israel is supposed to be committing genocide of the Palestinians, but the fact is that the Palestinian birth rate is soaring. I mean, if Israelis were genociders, they're the worst genociders. They're the most inept mass murderers in all of human history. The Palestinians who live in Israel and who are part of Israel are judges, lawyers, they vote. They're equal on almost every level, except that, perhaps serving in the IDF is a little touchy. So, the Palestinians who are under the rule of the rest of the Palestinians in Gaza and in the West, what's called the West Bank, Judea and Shomron, are not under Jewish law. They're under Arab law. They're under the Palestinian Authority and Hamas. So how are they being oppressed? They're being oppressed by not being allowed to kill all the Jews. That's how they're being oppressed. I mean, when people throw rocks at you, is it true sometimes that you overreact? Maybe shouldn't happen. But does all the world have to focus on a case where a Jew overreacted to being thrown a stone at? Not unless you're the president of Harvard who doesn't want Jews in. So it's not true. It's the big lie. The big lie. It's the big lie. The new big lie. They're so concerned about Jewish conduct. Why don't they go and help us free Black slaves?
Well, another way I actually respond to those who tell me, how dare you support Israel and how dare this and that, my response normally is, listen, there's just so many times you can slap me in the face until I punch you in the face. And that's what, and this isn't just Palestinians throwing the stones. It's almost 12 big, rich Islamic countries funding Palestinian terrorists to kill Jews. So it's Israel against 13 or 14 Islamic countries. Yeah. They're not oppressing anyone. They're protecting themselves and they're retaliating. Retaliation is legal. As a nation, as a country, you have the right to retaliate when someone attacks you. But again, as you said, as someone actually just said on the comments, when you have mainstream media lying about all of this, then a lot of people in America are under the impression that poor Palestinians are being oppressed, which I also say, there are so many Islamic countries. Why don't they just go and immigrate to those Islamic countries instead of just staying? I guess there are still refugees somehow. Just go live in Islamic country and have your rights. Guess what? They kill Jews in Islamic countries. You won't feel oppressed.
So, the Jews are also the worst retaliators. I mean, they're the worst mass murderers and they're the worst retaliators because, that they're shooting rockets at you from Hamas hides in buildings, mosques, schools, children's classrooms, hospitals, and they fire rockets at you. And the Israelis, who have the right to retaliate, they fly over and they won't bomb back. They won't retaliate if they think it's going to kill a lot of innocent people who the Muslim murderers are hiding behind. So,
they send warnings. Empty
right,
the building. We're about to
right,
attack it. They
right,
attack all the empty
right.
buildings.
So
They're horrible. Next question is a rhetorical question. How do you see U.S.-Israel relations under, God forbid, Biden administration?
So this is a big worry to people who think like we do, because it's not your grandfather's Democratic Party even. It may even not be Obama's Democratic Party. It may be the party of the squad. It may be a party of the woke. Biden himself, if he has principles, has always kind of been pro-Israel, but that was the old Democratic Party guys who were pro-Israel because there wasn't any pain to be had for being pro-Israel. Now that the other side has won so much ground, there's a lot of pain to be pro-Israel, and he's going to feel it. And he's going to feel it, even if he, in his heart, isn't anti-Israel. He's already been moved, 42 steps to the left by the squad and by Nancy, who's been moved by the squad. So who the hell knows what would happen? It's very, very dangerous. I mean, are they going to reinstitute the Iranian deal? Are they going to, threaten Israel that they won't support her with arms in case of an attack unless Israel does X, Y, and Z? Who knows? Who knows? I've already seen that Biden said, there's a little clip I saw yesterday, Biden says we have to teach Islam in American schools. So that might give you a hint about who's whispering in his ear.
That's very true. And again, with his most recent comment, which I truly believe he made that comment just based on lack of knowledge, that he would like more Islam to be taught in our schools, that's definitely boosted my worry as far as Biden's situation goes. Could you please repeat the name of the video about Columbia students?
Columbia Unbecoming. Columbia Unbecoming. This film was covered by the New York Times, the New York Post, the New York Daily News. It was a big, big event. The headline, I think, of the Daily News was "Poisoned Ivy." It was our attempt, Avi Goldwasser and me. It was our attempt to wake up the Jewish community and to say, this is going to get worse unless you put a stop to it. And they didn't want to fight. They didn't want to fight. And so now it's, as I said, 100 times worse.
Would you please also give Ilya's book name one more time?
Terror in the Cradle of Liberty.
Perfect. And you said it is available on Amazon.
Amazon, right? Yes, it is. It's a great book. It reads like a thriller. It's a page turner. It's very good, and it's a history that nobody wants to know. That a lot of important people don't want you to know. Let's put it that way.
Oh, of course. As of right now, America is all about one thing and one thing: erase history.
Right.
In any shape or form possible. The next question says, do you believe that the Democrat Party has green-lighted anti-Semitism by its failure to call out Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib for their new hating remarks?
I would say at least yellow lighting, maybe a little green lighting. Sure, I mean, when the Jews said to the Democratic Party, you have got to condemn what she said. Remember what she said about shekels and about Benjamins and about horrible classic Nazi stuff she said. So the Democrats, the Jewish Democrats, and a lot of other decent people said to the party, you have to condemn this specifically. And they wouldn't do it. What they did instead, to cover it up and not to make it really known that this is a big problem, they said, we're against all prejudice. You know, this one, that one, this one, this one. Oh, yeah, anti-Semitism and this one, this one. They're against all bad things that ever happened in the world, including anti-Semitism. Well, thanks a lot. I think it's true that once they give a signal that anti-Semitism will not get you punished in the Democratic Party. That's maybe a half a step away from anti-Semitism is quite okay with us. Maybe it's not a half a step away from it.
Right. Actually, I was about to say this, and then I saw someone saying it on the comments as well. Nancy Pelosi green-lighted anti-Semitism because didn't she recently endorse Ilhan Omar Rashida Tlaib?
Yes. She endorsed her. Right.
So what are your comments on that?
Well, it just shows you the Jews have lost the Democratic Party, or at least the leadership of the Democratic Party, or the biggest excited, surging faction of the Democratic Party. Look, this is a problem that liberals are being swallowed by progressives. You know, we're all classic liberals. Everybody on this call is a classic liberal. We believe in everybody should have equal rights, regardless of your color, your gender, your faith. Everybody should have equal rights. The progressives insist that everybody has to have equal results, right? Wow. So if everybody has to have equal results, then the only reason that some people haven't done as well as other people is that these people on top have mistreated, appropriated, oppressed the ones on the bottom. That's the only reason, right? Because if there's not equal result, why wouldn't there be equal results? Unless you stole it from him. Okay, so guess who is going to be the biggest stealer? It's going to be the Jews, right? Because now we're 1% of the 1%. We're white. So progressivism is a weapon aimed at the Jewish heart. There's no way around it.
Charles.
Yes.
Before we go, I will ask the last question, which I can easily say 8 to 10 people ask. What does an average person do to remove the bad leaders of Jewish community, replace them with good leaders, and start protecting Jewish communities? Okay,
great question. I spoke to Caroline Glick and Melanie Phillips about this on a webinar. They said there's 1 million to 1.5 million Jews in America who think the way we think. They are, I believe, unorganized. They're in lots of these groups who are fighting, right? They're in Camera, they're in Stand With Us, they're in ZOA, they're in this. But they have not been coordinated to be able to say, hey, Mr. Newsman, if you want what Jewish opinion is, you can't only ask these established leaders because there's us guys in the streets or, you know. So I think that's something. Another thing that they need to do is to write us, tell us you're ready and raring to go into the fight, and we'll help you. And also to go to your rabbi and say, you've got to speak out about this, about the rise of anti-Semitism, not just by the few Nazis. You've got to speak out the truth about the whole thing, and you've got to help us understand, and you have to come up. We have an ad in 16 Jewish newspapers with 10, I can send you, with 10 suggestions about what actual Jewish leaders need to do now. So I think all of those things are important. Go picket the local federation. Go picket the JCRC. We better start to act because they're driving us, our leaders are driving us into a very dark place. Agreed. Now, since you mentioned, you said for people to write to you and tell you they're ready to be part of this movement, where do they go? How do they get in touch with you? Easy. It's my name, Charles Jacobs with an S, 123, Charles Jacobs 123 @gmail.com. And your website? Peace and Tolerance, peaceandtolerance.org. Peaceandtolerance.org. And if they want to find out about Black slaves serving Arab masters, the letter I, abolish.org.
iabolish.org. Perfect. Dr. Charles Jacob, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom. Thank you for everything you've done and you continue doing. We appreciate you very much.
Thank you, Annie. It's great to see you. Thank you.
Absolutely. And to our audience who has stayed with us, thank you so much. I do apologize we didn't get to answer all of your questions, not because they weren't important, because unfortunately we ran out of time. Hopefully we will have Dr. Jacobs come back and answer some of them in the future. In the meantime, remember all these webinars are being brought to you by David Horowitz Freedom Center and the Glazov Gang for free. So if you'd like to support them, go to frontpagemag.com and do consider making a 100% tax deductible donation. Until next week, you all stay safe and goodbye.